Hello, Saints. Still in Ephesians chapter 2, but I'm there in verse 11. And we're talking about how we sit with Christ in heavenly places because he has already saved us. We have been saved by grace. And that was something that was done in the past. We were saved by the cross of Christ. But Paul says there in verse 11, he begins by saying, therefore, because we're saved, he says, therefore, remember that you formerly you, remember that formerly you, the Gentiles in the flesh, who are called on circumcision by the so-called circumcision, which is performed in the flesh by human hands. Remember that you were at that time separate from Christ. You were excluded from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now, in Christ Jesus, you who were formerly far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who made both groups into one and broke down that barrier of the dividing wall by abolishing in the flesh the enmity, which is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so that in himself he might make the two into one new man, thus establishing peace. What Christ did by the cross was to remove that ordinances, remove the laws that the Jews followed through the sacrificial system, that barrier between Jew and Gentile. Now, through the cross, both are joined together as one new being. And we come into Christ and we have peace. What we see through the cross is not just the bringing in of the Gentiles to salvation, but God's original intent to give the message to the whole world. Remember in Genesis 11, they built the Tower of Babel to make a name for themselves, and all the nations of the earth had gathered to do this. God had no nation to put his name in the world. That's why Israel came into existence. At the end of chapter 11, you're introduced to Abram for the first time, and through him he builds a nation, and through that nation he caused the world. That was not an accident. That was not just a sidebar. That was his intent all along, was to bring in the world into his kingdom. We are members of this kingdom. We are children of Father Abraham. We are sons adopted into God's kingdom. This was his purpose all along. It's not a side trip. It wasn't something he added on later. This was the whole purpose. And we're still going forward in time to build that kingdom. This is the story that Paul begins to tell in the letter to the Ephesians. The community of Christ, that great mystery of God that he deals with there in chapter 3. We are God's people from the very beginning. Not just a sidebar, not just some secondary group that was brought in. It's one body. It's one people, one new person. As Paul says, one new man. Let's be that and give this message to the world as we go forth to bring in the kingdom of Christ. Blessings.